American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh. President Trump will attend former President George Herbert Walker Bush's funeral. John Decker reports.
Word from the White House that President and Mrs. Trump will attend tomorrow's funeral for President George H.W. Bush at the National Cathedral, but the president will not be delivering a eulogy. Vice President Mike Pence represented the White House at a memorial service at the Capitol yesterday.
In all of his 94 years, President Bush never lost his love of adventure, and he never failed to answer the call to serve his country.
President and Mrs. Trump paid their respects to President Bush last night. The Trump White House has accommodated all of the Bush family's requests for the state funeral. At the White House, John Decker, Fox News.
An immigration enforcement advocate says, unfortunately, emotion, not facts, drives the immigration policy in the United States. Chad Groening has more.
Recently, the U.S. Census Department revealed a startling statistic. A whopping 63% of non-citizens, both legal and illegal, are on welfare, some 4.6 million households. The stats further reveal that if the non-citizens have been in the U.S. more than 10 years, the welfare dependency grows to 70%. While these stats should bolster President Trump's argument for better border enforcement, Ira Melman, who is a spokesman for the Federation for American Immigration Reform, or FAIR, says unfortunately the whole immigration debate is not based on facts.
If it was based purely on facts, we probably wouldn't be having this discussion. It's based primarily on emotion, and emotion is a very powerful argument.
But Melman says the facts remain nonetheless.
You have large numbers of people who are coming to the United States ill-prepared to succeed in a 21st century economy that we have, and it is costing the American taxpayers an awful lot of money. When you have close to two-thirds of all immigrant-headed households in this country relying on public assistance, that tells you that the whole immigration system is flawed and it needs to be rethought.
But Melman says in the current political climate, it is hard to get anybody to focus on facts when emotions run rampant. I'm Chad Groening.
A pro-life speaker says it's ridiculous what's happened to him since a speaking engagement at Wheaton College. Chris Woodward explains.
Ryan Baumberger recently appeared at Wheaton at the invitation of the college Republicans. The presentation was called Black Lives Matter in and out of the womb. Soon after, Baumberger was denounced in an email from student leaders who said his comments surrounding the topic of race made many students, staff, and faculty of color feel unheard and unsafe on our campus. Baumberger says that's ridiculous.
And what this all boils down to is that because I am black, I'm biracial, white and black, and I didn't toe the liberal racial line, they attacked me. 5 people were involved in this letter. Only one person actually attended the presentation.
Baumberger adds that nowhere in the denouncement of his presentation does anyone point out that he too is a person of color, something Baumberger views as a key point.
The great thing is there's an online version of the talk from Wheaton, so it's all recorded, but yet people who opposed me had no problem just completely making up things that were never said, distorting things that were said, and yet the Wheaton administration has done nothing to stop these defamatory statements. There are a lot of students who have passionately defended me and the talk and the college Republicans, and now there are a lot of parents, Wheaton parents and alumni, who are very upset with the way the school has handled this.
I'm Chris Woodward.
France's government is backing away from attacks that triggered deadly riots.
A U-turn from French President Emmanuel Macron's government. Prime Minister Edouard Philippe announcing that planned increases to fuel tax and utility bills are being suspended for 6 months. The Prime Minister saying no tax is worth putting the nation's unity in danger. It's unclear whether this is enough to halt the protests. High school students have been holding rallies today, some setting fires outside school, protesting education reforms. In London, Simon Owen, Fox News.
American Family News is online at onenewsnow.com and on the One News Now mobile app. I'm Rusty Pugh.
We just don't want to just hand out a box.
Franklin Graham of Samaritan's Purse shares the inspiration behind Operation Christmas Child's Discipleship Program, The Greatest Journey.
Children that put their faith and trust in Jesus Christ, we want them to grow in their faith. We want to disciple them.
Join Urban Family Talk Wednesday to find out more about The Greatest Journey or visit SamaritansPurse.org/OCC. She's sharp, pointed, and insightful. This is Stacy on the Right on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
On Sunday, French President Emmanuel Macron was booed as he toured the damage. He has vowed he won't back down on the fuel taxes aimed at cutting carbon emissions. Protesters who have no formal leadership also say they won't stop until they get what they want.
There's a massive bureaucracy dedicated to cultivating in students this delusional sense of their own oppression, and they carry this chip, this delusional victimology, into the world at large. And they are going around blaming American institutions of endemic racism and sexism when that no longer is true.
President George Herbert Walker Bush loved his family, and he served his country. His example will always inspire, and his lifetime of service will be enshrined in the hearts of the American people forever.
And now, Stacy Washington.
Welcome to the program. It is exciting to be with you. It's the week is moving so quickly, but then again, how can it not? We have so much going on right now, so much that we get to celebrate. Specifically, it's still a new headband every day to celebrate Christmas and the reason for the season. So I'm so excited about that. And today on the program, we're going to be speaking with Denise McAllister. She's a senior contributor to The Federalist, author and political commentator. We are also going to be delving into the life of a great individual, a president, a former vice president, a former ambassador, and a military veteran. He was a pilot and really an accomplished person. And this is something that we should be able to do regardless of political affiliation and disagreements. And so we'll be talking about the life of former President George H.W. Bush. And we're not going to spend a ton of time there, but we do need to just pause and take a moment to reflect on his legacy and what he was able to do for this country. And it's interesting to see the reaction online. Obviously, we can't go by what the trolls say. Twitter's not a great place to judge reactions on the whole. It's not really representative of the entire country. But there have been some notable differences in the treatment of this former president and some other people who've passed away. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Right now, I want to get into our daily confession for today. It's Romans 4:13 through 22. And this is something huge for us to acknowledge and to get our heads wrapped around. And that is that we are all heirs to the promise now through the work of Jesus Christ on the cross. And at no point in our history has it been more important for Christians to really fully grasp that God has already done the work, that Jesus Christ is God, that he did the work on the cross and enables us to walk in freedom and liberty, knowing that we can have our sins forgiven. That is the reality. So that's regardless of our feelings. That's regardless of whether or not we're living in condemnation or regret, which we should not be doing. There is no condemnation in Christ Jesus, and regret is not something that God wants us to engage in. We are to ask for forgiveness and to move forward, eyes on the prize, ever moving towards the mark. So Romans 4:13 through 22 says, "It was not through the law that Abraham and his offspring received the promise that he would be heir of the world, but through the righteousness that comes by faith. For if those who depend on the law are heirs, faith means nothing, and the promise is worthless, because the law brings wrath. But where there is no law, there is no transgression. Therefore, the promise comes by faith, so that it may be by grace and may be guaranteed to all Abraham's offspring, not only those who are of the law, but also to those who have the faith of Abraham. He is the father of us all. As it is written, I have made you a father of many nations. He is our Father in the sight of God, in whom he believed, the God who gives life to the dead and calls into being things that are not. Against all hope, Abraham in hope believed, and so became the father of many nations, just as it had been said to him, so shall your offspring be. Without weakening his faith, he faced the fact that his body was as good as dead, since he was about 100 years old, and that Sarah's womb was also dead. Yet he did not waver through unbelief regarding the promise of God, but was strengthened in his faith and gave glory to God, being fully persuaded that God had power to do what he had promised. This is why it was credited to him as righteousness." Now, in many places in the Bible, when God is speaking to his people, or in particular, I always think of, when I think of extraordinary acts of faith and people who really walked with the Lord with no doubt, I think of Joshua and how many times the Lord said to him directly, the battle is already yours. You've already won. You just need to go out with the armies of Israel and take this land, take this city, et cetera, et cetera. And he would. He may have had doubt, but he didn't allow that to stop him from being obedient to what God told him to do. Specifically, I'm thinking of that moment when Joshua was speaking with God, and God said, I've already given them into your hand. So God tells him before they've even launched their first spear, shot their first arrow, clashed their first sword, that you've already won this battle. So in real time, God tells him, go out and take this army and destroy them, utterly destroy them, burn the cities to the ground, kill everything alive within, burn everything that is known, anything you can see with your eyes, burn it to the ground. This is already yours. Now, that's what, the night before? He has to get up the next day with the armies of the Lord and go out there and make this happen. Halfway through the day, they're fighting, and the fighting is going well, but there are still so many more that have to be vanquished. So he says to the sun, stop. He says to the moon, don't move, so that we can finish what God has given us to do this day. That's extraordinary faith. Now, God is asking for no less from all of us when he tells us in Romans 4, as it is written, I've made you the father of many nations, and he's talking to Abraham. And Abraham looks at his body. He's old and shriveled up. His wife is old and shriveled up. There's no way in the natural they're having any more children. But God said they would have more children, and so, that they would have children, and so they did. And this is the covenant that God has with us, that righteousness comes by faith. It can't come through the law, because God has banished all of that with the coming of his son, Jesus Christ, and the work on the cross. So if we have anything to be encouraged about today, is that it is already finished. If you need encouragement about that, go to Revelation and read Revelation from beginning to end. The Bible says there's a special blessing on people who read and share Revelation with others. And there's a fantastic CD where you can get it and you can pop it into your CD player in your car and you can listen to Revelation on your way here and there. It's not scary. It's actually very encouraging. But I encourage you to hold on to what God has for us and to know that it is simply by faith that we believe and receive the promise that God has already completed it. The work is already done. We just have to walk it out. All right, right now I want to turn to this fantastic bit of audio. So Pastor John MacArthur, a rock in the world of Christendom for his preaching and teaching and leadership, he did an interview with Ben Shapiro. And obviously Ben Shapiro is Jewish. He's a practicing Jew. He has a strong faith walk. And he has this interview with Pastor John MacArthur. And it's a really interesting interview. I would encourage you to take a look at it, watch it. I think it's 45 minutes long. But this little bit here I thought was encouraging and instructive. He's talking about Christianity. It's Pastor John MacArthur, number 2.
Well, first of all, I don't like to talk about it as a philosophy. I'd rather talk about it as a revelation because it's divine. So the same God who wrote the Old Testament wrote the New Testament. That's my conviction. The Scripture has one author. And I need to say this. I am a Christian because of the Old Testament. Without the Old Testament, I don't know whether I could believe the New Testament. And that may sound strange to you, but how do I know that Jesus is the Messiah if I don't have all the predictions of the Old Testament defining him when he shows up?
So the Old Testament is just as important as the New. We can get so much encouragement from it. And I think that was also an overture on his part to Ben Shapiro, who is, as a Jewish person, doesn't read the New Testament, but only reads the Old Testament because they do not believe that the Messiah has come. And my prayer is that Ben Shapiro would come to know Jesus Christ, obviously, but that more people would engage in the kind of thoughtful dialogue that Ben Shapiro and John MacArthur, Pastor MacArthur, were engaging in just there, because there's so much for us to learn from not just the word, but from talking about it in the highways and the byways and spending time in that word so that we can be fully equipped. And so that's fantastic. That was a really good interview, and I hope that I hope that Ben Shapiro will continue to have people on to discuss all of the things that are going on. So additionally on the show today, we are going to be talking about this U.S. colleges breeding hate. UC Berkeley actually agreed to pay $70,000 to Young American Foundations. We'll be talking about that. And then Paris is burning. And you heard in the news bit from onenewsnow.com that the president of France has decided to postpone, not eliminate, but postpone the increase in gas tax. Now, I personally am aware of how much Europeans pay for gas. Back when I was a kid, gas was between $6 and $8, or 6 and 8, Deutschmarks per gallon. This is before the euro. And I remember thinking to myself, they're paying so much for it. Even if you translated that amount into dollars, when the dollar was $1.89 or $2 for every Deutschmark, it was still an astronomical amount for them to be paying, because in the United States, people were paying, $1 a gallon for gas. And also, here in the U.S., diesel prices are usually a little bit cheaper because we don't use very much diesel, but overseas they use a ton of diesel and it doesn't burn as clean, but it's cheaper. And it has to be cheaper because they've allowed climate activists to jack up the price of their fuel in the interest of forcing people to use public transportation. And they do have a lot of public transportation over in Europe that they use. They use it much more than we do. Obviously, less land mass, higher per capita population, so higher population per square mile. Their population density is just, it's like all of our major cities, but it's pretty much the whole thing, like the whole country, because they have so many people and so little land to spread the people out on. So they have a lot of public transportation, and it's really great. But in order to force more people to use public transportation, they keep their gas prices high through taxation, and people there are having trouble making a living. People there are literally trying to decide between eating and spending money on necessities like gasoline, fueling up their vehicles. So it is, I hate to see the death and the carnage and the burning of cars, but these people are raging mad. What I've noticed is that the news is not connecting this to the climate agenda. Macron has this obsession with saving the earth through tiny industrialized nations cutting themselves back to the bone and basically destroying themselves through income redistribution so that they can be a part of the movement to save the planet. Meanwhile, planets with enormous population like Pakistan and China, they're certainly making moves on cleaning up their emissions, but they're not doing anything close to what developed nations are doing. And the leader of the pack is, as always, the United States. So instead of breaking his countrymen's backs under this climate agenda, he should say, obviously, this is more like a religion than science. It's believe what we believe or you're out of the herd. No dissent is allowed. And I'm not going to destroy the people of France in order to meet this agenda. But he doesn't have to worry about it because he's rich. He has a motorcade. The people of France pay for his gasoline costs and his vehicles. So he can afford to break their backs over this issue while keeping himself in the lifestyle that he has grown accustomed to because he's in power. Do you see the problem there? This is why America has a public service oriented constitution that we're getting away from. We already have a two-class system, the rulers and the ruled. We already have people who are above the law, the Clintons. We already have groups of individuals who feel like they need to make laws for them and then separate laws for themselves, Congress. We've got to remember our foundation so we never have to worry about someone like Macron being the leader of this country. All right, when we get back, we're going to have Denise McAllister, senior contributor to The Federalist. Stay there.
The Ministry of Preborn meets abortion-minded women right where they are. When a young mom sees her baby on ultrasound, she's 80% more likely to keep her baby.
And I got to hear and see my baby for the first time. Hearing the heartbeat made me cry, and it was certain that I was going to keep my baby forever.
This mom chose life for her baby.
She's been such a joy. Her name even means rebirth and sort of being raised up from the ashes. I now see my daughter, and I cannot imagine my life without my happy, lovely, joyful, smart baby, and I'm so grateful.
Preborn runs and leads Christian pregnancy centers all over the country. To find out more, go to preborn.com. That's preborn.com, or dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby. That's pound 250 and say baby. Your love can save a life.
Hi, I'm Crawford Loritz with a legacy moment. I'll never forget one winter when our children were very small and we were driving 450 miles to see my parents. On the way, we ran into a terrible, blinding snowstorm. We had blizzard conditions, and the first order of business was to get off that highway and find somewhere to stay. We pulled up to a motel, and they said, sorry, no room. So we went over the ramp to another motel on the other side of the highway. Same thing, no vacancy. I began to panic. We prayed, Lord, please direct us, lead us. Someone said that there was another motel at the next exit, so we crept back onto the highway and inched our way to the exit. Thank God they had a room. As Christians, we too are on a journey, but we don't follow our Savior with fear and uncertainty. Our future is certain. Listen to what Jesus says in John chapter 14. As he's cluing in his disciples about what's going to happen after he goes back to heaven. John 14, verses 1 through 6. Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. Then his response to Thomas's question, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Well, here's what I want you to remember today. Hold on to the assurance that we're going to a real place to be with a real person. And no matter how bad conditions get along the way, our reservation is guaranteed.
Join Crawford Loritz tomorrow for another Legacy Moment.
This is Stacy on the Right with Stacy Washington on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Welcome back to the program. Thank you for being here. You know what? It's Keep Christ in Christmas wristband time. You can go to afa.net to order. It is our way of standing against the politically correct forces that basically say we can celebrate the holiday, we can spend the money, but we're not going to talk about Christ or Christmas. We want to keep Christ in Christmas, which is why we want you to go to afa.net to order the wristbands and join us in wearing them and spending time talking about the reason for the season. If we don't have Christ, there's no Christmas. And so these are great conversation starters. They're not confrontational. They're actually fun and cute. And the wristbands are sold in sets of 10. So if you purchase 2 or more sets, you receive a discount. And they're in stock waiting for your order. They ship immediately, and your order includes free shipping. The deadline to order is December 17th, and we really appreciate you partnering with us in this way. And so I'm not sure if we have our guest just yet. So what we can do is we can kind of preview a little bit of what she's going to be discussing when she joins us in just a couple of minutes, which is white women voting for Republicans, as is their right, as is the right of anyone to vote for anyone. We're going to be discussing that with our next guest, who is Denise McAllister, senior contributor to The Federalist, author and political commentator. Denise, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So it's great to talk to you, especially about this subject. I actually covered this a little bit. I was a bit outraged, and I covered it here on the program. And I just want to point out that it is perfectly fine for me to comment on white women voting for Republicans, I think, because I'm not a white woman, I'm black, but I also think it's okay for me to comment this in the same way that it's okay for white people to discuss racism or issues like Planned Parenthood and the genocide in the black community. I think these are all subjects we can all discuss. And I think it's actually better when we all talk about them instead of limiting ourselves to saying, well, I can only talk about something if it impacts my demographic group, as if that's the only aspect of ourselves that really matters.
Well, I agree, because it'd be nice to be able to get past these surface distinctions between us, because we have a whole lot more in common than just our skin color, and a whole lot more interest. And that's one of the key issues in this situation, is that we're judging people by their skin color instead of really looking about why they're voting the way they are, and judging them simply because they haven't come in and are part of a demographic. In this case, all women sticking together and supposedly having to vote the same way. And, whether you're white or black, all women are expected to vote according to democratic ideals. And when a group of women, they don't, they're wondering, it must be racism. And, I'd like to be able to get beyond that.
Me too, to be honest with you, because the assumption here that's being ignored when we say white women or any entire demographic group is that there's a built-in assumption that if you're not voting for Democrats, you're evil, you're wrong, you're voting against your own personal best interests, which ignores other factors that are far more important than whether or not you're a woman, namely the economy, national safety, whether or not law and order still exists in this country, the presumption of innocence. I mean, there are a lot of areas in which the Democrats have shown themselves to be completely against the American ideal. And so to say that women have to vote for the Democrats ignores those other really important issues.
Yeah, and it also ignores how the Democrats play to the identity politics. And, when people accuse these groups of white women supposedly voting because they're racist, they ignore the fact that black women, this fight in mass, almost vote Democratic. And so you have to ask, well, why is that? I mean, why are these groups coalescing to each other? And is it really because of race, or is it because of what's being promised? And I would say that there's, you have to look at the ideology and the principles behind why each group is voting the way they are, and really examine what's going on here. And it goes beyond race. It goes really through principles of what you value, liberty principles, or in some cases, if you think that government should be doing more for people and be more intervention involved in people's lives, and just get past the identity politics, get down to what the real issues are.
So let's talk about your piece over at thefederalist.com. You ask a question. Well, you quote the writer at the Daily Beast who writes an open letter asking, "Dear white lady, what are you doing to us?" And then Slate, these are both far left organization magazines, online magazines. Slate doubled down, accusing white women of self-loathing and hypocrisy, which is something that I'm familiar with because I'm often told that I hate myself because I don't join, the 90+% of black women who vote for the Democrats. But I'm really not understanding how they think they can go from bullying a small group of women, 7% of women of the entire group of women in the country, 51% of the country is women, 7% of that number are black. And they've done a very effective job in bullying 90% of those women into unthinkingly voting for the Democrats exclusively. But how do they propose to get that much larger group of white women by this simple, it's very simplistic, the idea that you're wrong if you're voting for the Republicans, no further explanation needed?
Well, again, because they're putting all women need to be voting and acting according to the group identity of being a woman. And that breaks down, obviously, into the black and white women, but there also is just where we all stick together. It has to do with this intersectional feminism where, you're an oppressed class. And so, you have the African-American group, and then you have the female group, but the female group includes all races. And so according to this kind of theory, you need to be, as a woman, you need to recognize that you're oppressed, that the patriarchy is oppressing you, and that you really don't have rights in this country. And so therefore you should band together with all the sisters of every color against the patriarchy, i.e. the Republican Party, and vote as a coalition. And when you deviate from that, you're accused of, oh, you must be a betrayal to women, to being a woman, or to your race, if that's the more specific issue, or, you just don't really understand how you're enslaved, to this misogynistic, white man rulership of the patriarchy. And so they're guilted into voting according to democratic principles or ideology. And, it can be a big group, like you said, or a small group, but the guilt is being spread upon them, saying, you need to vote a certain way. And they want to rope them in. And let's be frank, I mean, most women do vote Democratic. And, so they want all of them, because this group of white women in particular are really making a difference in some of these districts. And they need to be swayed to come over here to the Democratic Party to make these races not so tight.
But you know what happens, Denise, when you play demographic whack-a-mole? That's what I call it. It's demographic whack-a-mole. It's my favorite game to watch people play, because it's like any game of whack-a-mole, you cannot win. Down in Florida, DeSantis was pushed over the edge by 100,000 black women voting for him, not because he's a Republican, not because they're black or he's white, but because he actually supports school choice. So instead of his campaign reaching out to these women, other outside groups acting with complete autonomy reached out and placed ads and did, get out the vote efforts to let black women know your kids are trapped in failing schools, and the only person who's willing to give them a chance to get out is DeSantis. And 100,000 of those women said, my kids are more important than my demographic box or my victimhood, and voted for him and put him over the top. So again, they're whacking white women over the head, and 100,000 black women in Florida said, I like school choice, and put DeSantis in. So the whack-a-mole cannot work, but it's important, the writing you're doing, to point this out, because I think without the explanation, a lot of, I'm sorry, I'm going to go ahead and say it, but I'm going to preface it with an apology. A lot of people are going to go ahead and buy into this garbage, and people being women, some of them white, some of them, it doesn't matter what color you are. People are going to buy into this because it's being presented in a way that makes you like a villain if you don't just agree. Am I right? I mean, it's just, you're bad if you're doing this.
Oh, absolutely. So don't apologize. No, let's stand together. No, it's not, we're not standing against women, but that's what you're made it to be accused of.
Right.
If you're, standing against women if you don't vote lockstep with the Democratic Party. And people like you and I, we're saying, no, we're not doing that. We're voting for liberty principles. We're voting for school choice. We're voting pro-life. We're voting for, free trade, or whatever it is that our issues are that we stand for, that the Democratic Party may not represent. And that's what we want. But the Democratic Party, they can't, because they're an ideology and they want to reduce everything to one single kind of conflict, they can't engage on that level. And so they want to pit one group against the other, and that's where they get their power, and they guilt you into voting and acting according to what the group dynamic is. So if you don't fall in line with the rest of the women, if you don't fall in line with the rest of the black women, rest of the white women, whatever, in this case it's women, all as a group, then you're a traitor. You're a slave, again, to the patriarchy, and it's insulting, because think about it, Stacey, these people are saying they represent women, right? But yet they're treating a whole bunch of women as if they don't think for themselves.
Well, they're also ignoring
that. Women, or do you not?
But they're ignoring something else. So in your piece, you really go through and methodically take this apart, which is exactly what's needed, because in order for us to think about this in a news cycle that's 24 hours where we're constantly being bombarded with news, you're going to hear this blurb on, it's going to make its way down to the locals, and everyone's going to say, are white women betraying other women by continuing to vote for Republicans? And women who are cooking and managing kids, or maybe driving kids to and from, sports, are going to think, wait a minute, am I? And so they need to understand what's being done to them, that it's an indoctrination process. First, you hit the person over the head with, you're wrong and you're hateful, and here's why. But you don't really go any further than that, because in your piece, you talk about this hierarchy where a Muslim woman who's transgender surpasses the gay black woman in social standing, but white women have less legitimacy than black women, and on it goes. And you also talk about when they're talking about straight white men and the patriarchy and oppression, the big thing that glares to me is that, so if you're, I don't care what color you are, you may be married to a man, more than likely, because, you know, homosexual marriage has not become prevalent in this country. It's not like 80% of all marriages are same sex. So the majority of women are married to men. And the majority of women in this country, because it's still a white majority country, are married to white men. So the assumption that every white man is a part of the patriarchy and an oppressor means your father is an oppressor, your son's an oppressor, and your husband is an oppressor. How do they expect to get women to buy into that? These are the men that they're cooking dinner for, or cooking dinner for them, are paying their mortgages together, doing everything together, but this man is oppressing you. How exactly? How do they get from where they are now, which is they have a lockstep on Muslim, transgenders, gay, blacks, all that stuff? How do they get to convincing white women that every man in their life is an oppressor?
They have to hit home the fact that all women are victims. And so they have to lay the seed of fear in their minds that all men, it may not be the men in their immediate life, but men in general. I mean, how often do you hear this? You know, are you a victim of racism? Oh, no, but I know lots of people who are. Mm-hmm. Or have you, speaking to a woman, have you been experienced, you know, terrible sexism? Oh, no, but I know people are everywhere. Or can you not get your health care? Oh, no, but I know a whole lot of people that do. You know, it's just kind of this moving from the micro to the macro, because you are so inundated through media, through the culture, through pop culture, through online social media, of messaging that says this is the reality. So it's a fabricated reality that's imposed upon the individual through the media. So that becomes the reality, even though their real life is a contradiction to it. Mm. So when it comes to the political sphere, they draw from the fabricated reality and the fabricated truth instead of really looking at their own real life and say, you know, hey, I have a brother, like you said, I have a brother, I have a father, a son. They're not predators. I love them. I want them to have due process. I don't want them to be presumed guilty as predators. Mm. But yet, when they go into the political sphere, they're immediately guilted into, oh, no, but all men are predators. So therefore, I have to vote lockstep with women who want to make sure that these men don't have more power. And what we need to say to women is, don't think in group dynamics. Don't think in these otherworldly, non-real circumstances that's given to you by the media. Think about your own real life. Think about your principles. Think of it as an individual and bring those principles to your political and social and cultural activities and votes, and make that your reality, because that is your reality, not what's imposed upon you by a fabricated culture.
Mm. Okay, and then I guess because we just have a minute left, so you also mentioned in your piece, and it's a great piece, I encourage people to read it, and I'll put it on my Twitter feed in just 1 second here, but you talk about the Democrats, if they keep down this road, will they ever have a white man as their nominee? Out of the 20 or 40 people who are considering running for in 2020 on the D side, I'd say 80% of them are men, white men. So do they really plan to run on this while they have probably a white man and a white woman as their primary and vice presidential candidates?
Well, they will have, especially they will have these people who represent, who may be a white man or a white woman, but they don't speak that way. They speak to the identity group. But I do think that when it comes to political sphere, that the nominee will probably not be a white man or a white woman. Not that it should be, not that he or she should be. It should be about principles. That's my point, is get it down to, what do you stand for? It doesn't matter what the color of your skin is. It doesn't matter what your sexual orientation is. We need to get back to individualism, individual principles, and principles of liberty, and look at that, and not what group you're in or who you think is victimized or not.
I agree, but I just don't see that kind of conversation happening on the left. They're doubling down and tripling down, and I can't even understand it. It's getting to a place where I'm really having trouble deciphering it all. But you have totally deciphered it. Thank you, Denise McAllister from The Federalist, thefederalist.com. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
All right, talk to you again soon. All right, we'll be back with more Stacey on the Right, 866-963-2037. Be right back. This is Just a Minute with Stacey Washington. A Republican from Oklahoma has a plan to fund completion of the wall at our southern border. Senator Jim Inhofe's solution is simple. Reduce illegal immigrants' access to federal welfare and use those savings to fund the wall. Here are the specifics. The WALL Act would require each person seeking to collect a child tax credit to have a work-authorized Social Security number instead of just the child. It would also require that E-Verify be used to prove citizenship. The minimum fine levied against illegal border crossers would be increased. With open borders Democrats poised to take over the House in January, Inhofe's plan should be implemented during the lame duck session. It's no secret that America is a great place to live. Congress should act quickly to end the attraction of taxpayer-funded easy living for illegal immigrants. I'm Stacey Washington. Find out more at StaceyOnTheRight.com.
There are many ways you can listen to the shows of Urban Family Talk. One of those ways is through our very own app. Whether you have an iPhone or an Android, just go to the App Store and search for Urban Family Talk. You'll have immediate access to 24-hour programming as well as the podcast for each show. You'll be able to tune in no matter where you are. Speaking of tuning in, we have our own channel on another radio app called Tune In. Cool, right? Urban Family Talk is everywhere. Just download the app and take us wherever you go.
Abraham Hamilton III.
God put us in this world at this time to be salt and light. We don't fold because of the darkness that we're facing. This is not the first time in the world's history that it's gotten dark. God has called you and I to be his ambassadors, even in this dark moment.
Tune in to the Hamilton Quarter, weekdays at 5 p.m. Central on Urban Family Talk.
This is Poll Paris with Fox News Director of Polling, Dana Blanton.
This was a big election year. Over 49% of the eligible population voted in 2018. That's the highest turnout for a midterm election in almost 100 years. What motivated folks? One obvious thing, President Trump. For our Fox News voter analysis, we surveyed more than 100,000 voters nationwide. It shows more than 6 in 10 voters said the president was a factor in their vote. For 25%, their vote was to express support for President Trump. More, 38%, voted to express opposition. Still, the survey also finds Americans feeling positive about the economy. 66% say it's in excellent or good shape. That's nearly double the number who rate economic conditions negatively. What about looking ahead? To find out, we asked voters if they think life for the next generation will be better or worse than life today. 24% say life will be better. Twice as many, 49%, say worse. I'm Dana Blanton, and that's your Poll Paris.
You can watch a live stream of the show on Facebook or YouTube at Stacey on the Right. Now, back to the show on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Today, President Bush becomes the 32nd American to lie in state in the United States Capitol Rotunda. Soon, Americans from every corner of the country and every walk of life will make their way to this rotunda to pay the respects of a grateful nation. Upon the death of Abner, it is written that King David said, "Do you not realize that a commander and a great man has fallen in Israel this day?" George Herbert Walker Bush was such a man. While he was known as the quiet man, it was not for lack of nerve or daring. For in all of his 94 years, President Bush never lost his love of adventure. And he never failed to answer the call to serve his country.
Welcome back to the program. Call lines are open at 866-963-2037, 866-963-2037. Please do go to afa.net and purchase a package of the Keep Christ in Christmas wristbands. We're so excited about that. This is the time of year where, in addition to the Stacey on the Right Show headbands, you can also buy the new Christmas wristbands from AFA, afa.net to order. Thank you so much for joining with us in that. So let's talk a little bit about George H.W. Bush, 41st President of the United States, dead at the age of 94. He died in his home in Houston, Texas, surrounded by family. And he really lived an exemplary life. He died 8 months after his wife, Barbara Bush, and they had an epic love affair that spanned the decades, many children, and really they have a legacy that they leave behind of strong marital ties. One of the most fascinating things to me about the two of them is their love affair. I kind of have a thing about marriage, as you probably know, listening to the program, and I prize it highly because it is the union of a man and a woman and God. And when you marry, you create a covenant with God and your spouse that lasts on through the ages. And it is foundational here in this country, marriage. It was once said by Alex de Tocqueville that marriage is so highly prized in the United States and was such a unique and beautiful experience here. Oh, he just raved about his time spent in America and his observation of how men and women treated each other and how women seemed so joyously, just their participation in marriage was such an example for the rest of society. And he talked about it many times in his life after leaving the United States, the impact that seeing American marriage had on him. And I have the same kind of admiration for those who are married, especially as they get on in the decades and they've been married for a substantial amount of time. Oh, how I love seeing older married couples together and couples who are 10 or 20 years ahead of my husband and myself. And I also enjoy greatly seeing younger married couples, newly married, those who've been married for 7, 10 years, those who are over 10 years but less than 20. I enjoy seeing strong marital bonds. I believe it's a blessing from God and a privilege to have a marriage and to be a part of a loving union like that. And so they had that in spades. Before entering politics, Bush served in the Navy during World War II. He was a decorated fighter pilot. He was shot down, the youngest fighter pilot in the Navy at one point. And he was a one-term president. He entered in 1989 the presidency with decades of public service. Remember, he was the vice president to Ronald Reagan. He served in Congress. He was the ambassador to the United Nations. He was the chairman of the Republican National Committee and the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. He was just a really accomplished man, but very humble. And he also was the creator of the 1,000 Points of Light, which, you know, people, it's really funny. What I find it really odd when I see people criticizing something that was hugely popular afterwards without acknowledging that at the time it was seen as innovative and creative and something fantastic. You're free to criticize, but it's interesting if you try to downgrade something afterwards without acknowledging that at the time it was seen as something really special and something that did well. He was known for a nuanced approach to the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. And, you know, President Bush, he's a part of that, part of our American history where he was present for all of those things. His decision to invade Iraq in 1991 under Operation Desert Storm rippled for decades after his presidency. And I remember that too. I remember seeing my dad's unit, a lot of troops from his unit deploy to Operation Desert Storm. We were stationed in Germany, my dad was, and I was growing up there. And I remember seeing people that I'd seen, you know, all around the base, and I'd see them at my dad's work, and they left and they came back, and a lot of them had disfiguration from being there, but the harsh conditions, they lost their hair, they had, you know, skin discoloration, things like that. And I remember thinking for the first time since my father had told me about his experience in the Vietnam War, what war was really like. I remembered like being shocked by it. I remember seeing women who were kind of gorgeous and used to cut a fine form in their uniforms coming back from Desert Storm and looking completely changed. And it wasn't a war that really took a long time for us. But it was something that was really, I'll never forget it. And President Trump has acquitted himself admirably in honoring the Bush family and in being really presidential in his commemoration of the life of President H.W. Bush. And I just want to take this moment on the show to acknowledge the loss and the marriage that he and his wife had and the legacy that he leaves behind with his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, and to offer my condolences to the Bush family. I haven't always agreed with everything that they've done, but I do acknowledge their impact on the history of this country and their impact worldwide through their service to the public, all of them. And so I offer my condolences. We'll go to the phones now. Kay in Kansas. Thank you so much for calling the show today.
Hello?
Hi. Thanks for calling in.
Well, I love listening to American Family Talk and American Family Radio. And after the listen to the regular news, we don't listen. We listen to One America News online on the TV. Yeah. But I like American Family. But One American News, they tell the truth. And the one thing I'm very disappointed, and I had given donations to American Family Radio, and I think they do a very good job. But one thing that very disappoints me, and I don't think they seem to understand, and I've talked to several people, why has American Family Radio bought into the definition, the political correctness of calling people gay? I know that's traditional, but it didn't used to be years ago. I do volunteer work at rest homes, and I know an older lady, and I know a lady about my age. Their name is Gay. What does gay mean? It means happy. And it's politically correct, to call them gay because that's what they define themselves as. What would God call them? What does the Bible say? The Bible, God would never call them gay. They're homosexuals. I feel sorry for them. I don't hate them. I don't hate them at all. I feel sorry for them. But to let them define, and it's just like in this country, they're redefining everything. Even Christianity, I think they're redefining. And I just think American Family Radio, you're able to get the truth out a lot better than I am. I live out in the country, and we're all supposed to tell the truth. What would God call it? I don't think he would call it. And they're the ones that define themselves as gay. And back in the day when they first started saying that, people wouldn't go along with it. But now even the so-called conservatives are buying into that.
Well, Kay, thank you for calling in with the comment. I try to call them homosexual. I try to describe the activity. It's a lifestyle choice. I use same-sex and also homosexual interchangeably. I think one of the things that you point out is a truth that I will acknowledge and I will readily accept your criticism, which is the media and most mainstream outlets call it gay. And hearing that drummed into your head over and over and over again means you're going to adopt the language that you hear most often. And that is the power of language, to be able to change minds without actively getting a person to accept the change. And so it's a constant check. And I think you calling in today is a good reminder to us that what we call things matters, and that we need to consult with the Bible and make sure that we're speaking biblically, and that we need to be cognizant of the changes that are happening to us without our permission, even against our will, because it is not my intention to describe homosexual behavior as being happy or gay. And I understand that a lot of people have the last name Gay in this country, and I do believe that when we had a proper definition of the word gay, we were able to use it, and it was good. So thank you for calling in and for sharing that. I readily receive the criticism. I think it's good for us to be reminding each other. It's good for you to call us and let us know where you feel like we need to shore up. And so thank you. So we still have a little more time in this segment, about 5 minutes, I think. If you want to call in, you're welcome to 866-963-2037, 866-963-2037. So I thought it was pretty interesting today. And again, we have so much news to cover. We have so much that we can discuss. And I know we've covered a ton of immigration issues here on this show, especially of late. And I think it's good to cover it because we need the truth out there. But one more little tidbit, which I think is really, really important to how we discuss this, is we've talked a little bit about Fronteras, the open borders group that has been sending Americans down to Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador to recruit people to join the migrant caravans. And caravan organizers, the same people who went down to Honduras, now that these people, 6,000 of them, have settled in Tijuana, and they're, as is the case with any group of 6,000 people, because I'm so tired of people acting like what I'm saying is only specific to this group or that group. 6,000 people anywhere, you're going to see some property damage. You're going to see a huge amount of trash and human waste. You're going to see a lot of people congregated together like that means sickness will pass more readily. People in close quarters. That's why you don't pack people into close living conditions without any kind of barrier. That's why the U.S. government has gotten away from these huge housing projects, because it breeds crime and disease. And so you're seeing that. And as conditions are getting more and more difficult, you're seeing these organizers dump these people off and leave, because their goal is to create anarchy and to destroy our social fabric. And that's what they've been able to do by coercing these people into the area. The other story that I saw is that a bunch of 24 migrants just gave up on waiting for asylum and decided to cross the border illegally. How are they still doing that with 5,000 troops down there? What are you doing, Secretary Nielsen? What is going on? So remember, these people were lured into this situation in the city of Tijuana, Mexico, on the border of San Diego and Mexico. They were lured into it via flyers, social media postings, press appearances, and they were looking for moms, kids, and babies in strollers. Those are the looks that they wanted to create for the media picture that they're trying to paint, the propaganda angle that they're trying to go for. And so you don't get to see a lot of images of the military-aged young men sitting in the squalid camp, waiting for their turn to enter the country. They're no longer an advertisement for entering easily into the U.S. In fact, what this is doing is it's showing lots of people that it is very difficult to get into America, and now even more so under President Trump. God bless him. God bless him for even standing firm on this, as he promised to do when he was running. We have time for one call before we end this hour of the program. Valerie in Virginia. Valerie, thanks for calling in today.
Hi, Stacy.
Hi.
It's so good to talk to you, and I appreciate your program tremendously. I listen to it every chance I get.
Thank you.
My comment today is just about President Bush, H.W. Bush, something that seems to be missed by a lot of people, and I give him, like you, a lot of kudos for the way he lived his life with his family and the wonderful relationship he had with his wife and grandkids and all of that. I don't want to take away anything from that. But President Bush was a globalist, and that seems to get lost when everybody is talking about what a wonderful president he was. He was a globalist. He gave us Agenda 21. He signed us on to that. He was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, which is a group that I'm sure you know of.
I do.
And and so those are things that just don't seem to be mentioned when everybody is talking about how wonderful he was and how he lived his life. Those are things that have impacted our nation and that we are fighting against. The patriots are fighting against today.
Yeah, you are right. Valerie, you're right. And I don't really go into those. I was just trying to give him a tribute, but I understand where you're coming from. That's the way I feel about John McCain and people continuing to laud him when so much of what he did with his career as a public servant was detrimental to our country. And so that's why I tried to highlight the majority of my comments about President Bush on his family life and all of that. But the points you've made are true and accurate and well received. Thank you for listening and for calling the show today. Good evening from the Heartland. One News Now. News and information is up next. God bless.
Urban Family Talk.
There's a lot happening around us. That's why Christians need to stand strong on family values and morality. Hi, I'm Ray Rooney, editor of The Stand, a blog from the American Family Association. The Stand has timely, carefully written articles on relevant cultural issues that you can quickly forward to others. Visit afa.net/thestand.
Truth, wisdom, Empowerment. Urban Family Talk, a ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Steve Pugh. Thousands continue to pay respects to the late President George H.W. Bush. Lying in state at the U.S. Capitol, Rachel Sutherland has more.
They're standing in long lines to pay final respects to the late president, a World War II pilot and member of the greatest generation.
He comes from a generation of people that treat people like people.
Great opportunity to witness history.
People from all walks of life filing through the quiet Capitol Rotunda. A four-legged visitor, Sully the service dog, also paid a visit. The guards of honor standing watch, dressed in ceremonial uniforms and armed with rifles and fixed bayonets. Their job is to display continuous respect while providing security. In Washington, Rachel Sutherland, Fox News.
The countdown is on to a major vote in Britain about the country's possible exit from the European Union. Greg Palcott reports from London.
Today in the House of Commons, the first of 5 days of debate leading up to a vote on Prime Minister Theresa May's compromise plan to leave the EU. There's just one hitch. After 2.5 years, almost no one likes it, and it probably won't pass. It was back in 2016 when the UK voted 52 to 48% to leave the EU, supposedly to take back their government, control their borders. Since then, the country has found out it's not as easy as that. So the options are to go along with this fudge deal or a no deal, which would mean the country would basically fall off an economic cliff, or another referendum on the question. Some fireworks ahead here in the UK. In London, Greg Palcott, Fox News.
Alleged victims of a wealthy Florida financier who avoided prison time for child molestation through a plea deal won't be testifying in a civil trial, now that the parties of the lawsuit reached a last-minute agreement. The lawsuit is of interest because the prosecutor who made the original agreement allowing Jeffrey Epstein to remain in his opulent home is now a key member of President Trump's cabinet. Eben Brown reports from Miami.
A lawsuit between lawyers once involved in the aborted prosecution of billionaire Palm Beach money manager Jeffrey Epstein on charges he sexually assaulted about 100 teenage girls is settled out of court just minutes before the trial was expected to begin. Terms of the deal are being kept quiet, but it means one lawyer won't be bringing out the original then underage girls to testify. Epstein's attorney back in 2008 signed a plea deal with then U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta, who is now President Trump's labor secretary, that kept Epstein out of prison and ended a federal probe into alleged trafficking. In Miami, Eben Brown, Fox News.
Surveys find millennial Christians are drifting away from a biblical view of sex and marriage, so it shouldn't come as that much of a surprise when a well-known Christian singer says she can't say if homosexuality is a sin.
You might not know the name Lauren Daigle, but you've probably sung her songs in church. Daigle was recently interviewed on the Dominic Natty podcast. Natty asked her thoughts about homosexuality since she'd recently performed on the Ellen DeGeneres show.
Do you feel that homosexuality is a sin?
You know, I can't honestly answer on that in the sense of I have too many people that I love that they are homosexual. I don't know. I'm not God.
It's a perfectly millennial answer, the younger set in general being drawn more to tribe and tale than facts and faith. Alex McFarland of Exploring the Word on AFR says for a couple generations, the church has been failing its youth.
We've got 40, 50 years of American youth ministry that's been very often more about games and fun than about rigorous discipleship.
McFarland says the answer to the question posed to Daigle is very simple, but not at all easy.
And make no mistake, the Word of God is unequivocally clear. All homosexual activity is sin.
McFarland does see some hope, however, with Daigle.
I just say read the Bible and find out for yourself. And when you find out, let me know, because I'm learning too.
Perhaps she's teachable. I'm Steve Jordahl.
American Family News is online at onenewsnow.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download the One News Now mobile app.
American Family Radio.
Samaritan's Purse.
And your family.
Together, we can bring good news and great joy to needy children.
Simply pack an Operation Christmas Child shoebox with toys, school supplies, and hygiene items. Then, drop off your shoebox gift during National Collection Week.
Visit AFR.net, click the Operation Christmas Child banner, and then get packing.
She's sharp, pointed, and insightful. This is Stacy on the Right on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
On Sunday, French President Emmanuel Macron was booed as he toured the damage. He has vowed he won't back down on the fuel taxes aimed at cutting carbon emissions. Protesters who have no formal leadership also say they won't stop until they get what they want.
There's a massive bureaucracy dedicated to cultivating in students this delusional sense of their own oppression, and they carry this chip, this delusional victimology, into the world at large. And they are going around blaming American institutions of endemic racism and sexism when that no longer is true.
President George Herbert Walker Bush loved his family, and he served his country. His example will always inspire, and his lifetime of service will be enshrined in the hearts of the American people forever.
And now, Stacy Washington.
Welcome to the program. Stacy Washington, host of Stacy on the Right here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk, urbanfamilytalk.com, stacyontheright.com. You can also find me on Twitter and Instagram at Stacy on the Right. And I'm also the co-chair for Project 21's National Advisory Council for the National Center for Public Policy Research and the 2018 Second Amendment Foundation Journalist of the Year. I get to say that for a little bit longer. So now in this hour in the program, so exciting, we're going to get to speak to Michael Gardner. He's the Senior Director of Communications for Medi-Share. He's going to talk to us about what Medi-Share is and what is the most important aspect about having it as an opportunity, kind of something that gives you an escape mechanism from Obamacare. So we're going to talk about that with him. That'll be in the third segment of this hour. Right now, I want to get into Paris burning. It's burning, and Emmanuel Macron is trying to tamp down the anarchy that is in the streets of Paris. And I've been to Paris 4 times. And I've been up in the Eiffel Tower, and I can tell you it is truly one of the most beautiful cities on earth. It is the kind of place where you see it in the movies, and then when you go there in person, you're literally stunned by how truly beautiful it is, how lovely it is. Now, I haven't been since they've had their, mass migration and all of that, and I've heard from friends who have been recently that it's kind of sad to see so many people covered from head to toe in those, black curtains. And that does kind of mar the beauty of the city and the people there. But it's not just romantic. It is a truly architecturally stunning city. And the people there are truly, they're used to the tourists. So they're cosmopolitan, but not like New York. There's French people are not like New Yorkers. There's no way to compare them to other people groups. It's just a very unique experience. And so ABC and NBC have taken it upon themselves to kind of hide away the true reason that people are so upset about the fact that Emmanuel Macron keeps jacking up their taxes. And he doesn't have to do it. He just wants to encourage people to behave in one way and stop behaving in another. And so is using this as a mechanism to do this. So here it is, number 3. Just listen for it. Number 3.
Remarkable images overseas tonight, the protests gripping Paris. Body cam video showing police rushing to the famous Arc de Triomphe where protesters were vandalizing the monument. Protesters known as Yellow Jackets are angry about rising gas prices and living costs in France. The biggest crisis yet for Emmanuel Macron. The government is considering imposing a state of emergency.
Tonight, no end in sight to the turmoil across France, including more confrontations with police. These ambulance drivers today joining the largest anti-government demonstrations here in decades. What began as a protest against President Emmanuel Macron's plan to raise fuel taxes, growing over the weekend into a movement fueled by rage. Anger from those who say his policies favor the wealthy. Streets barricaded, cars lit on fire, snipers perched on rooftops. Police body cameras capturing this clash at the Arc de Triomphe. Riot police battling with protesters clad in yellow vests.
Yellow vest protests, named after the safety vests worn by mostly peaceful demonstrators, began 3 weeks ago. They were fueled by a rise in the gasoline tax in a country where diesel already costs $6 a gallon and will go up another roughly 28 cents in January.
So a gas tax hike of 28 cents a gallon. I mean, it's like you got to be thinking to yourself, who do these people think we are? Because you're not getting a corresponding increase in your pay, and people still have to buy gas. You can change people's minds about issues. You can shift public opinion. You can even shape behaviors of large groups of people in a society through taxation. It can be done. But 28 cents in one hop, very little notice, just, hey, we're going to jack up your taxes. Again, when we separate people who are doing the governing from the people who are, actually receiving the governance, the ones who are going to actually be impacted by the laws, when you do that, you end up with this weird, it's an impetus that they have where they're like, oh, you know what, we have to do this. And any kind of naysaying, any think tank people or policymakers or analysts who say, well, this might anger people because we just hiked the taxes, or this might be something that would come across as being tone deaf. These people, they need options, not just, hey, we're jacking up your taxes. And Emmanuel Macron is like, yeah, but I don't have time to talk about this because me and my wife have got to go shopping for her $900 shoes. And I was one of those people who said, oh, look how she and Melania seem to have the same kind of fashion sense. And they seem to really click when they met. And it was such a cute little girl moment. But the fact is, the Macrons don't live like your average everyday French citizen. They're wealthy. They've been wealthy for ages, and they're removed from that. And there's, the people of France elected him, so they're going to get what they elected. You're going to get what you vote for. That is the beauty, and it's also the curse of voting. People who live in dictatorships who don't get to vote, they just get whoever is crafty enough and sneaky enough and can gather together enough power and armed military might. That's who gets to be in charge of their country. And however it's run is up to that person. But when you're a voter and you're in a country that gives you the right to select your leader and to vote them in or vote them out, when you vote someone in, even for those of us who voted against Barack Obama, but we were a part of the culture that elected him, we're a part of the culture that created Barack Obama, just like liberals right now are a part of the culture that created the space for Donald Trump. So you're not going to get away from it. And I remember realizing that when President Obama was elected, and I remember seeing it in, some people wrote op-eds about it. I remember reading a passage in the Bible, about God controlling the leader, but that governments are set up by people and that people elect those governments and that we're all responsible for the culture that we live in. The prevalence of pornography, just as many people in church watch pornography as people who don't go to church. The prevalence of abortion, just as many women who sit in the pews at church have abortions as those who don't. When you look at what we have in this culture, there is no group who can, well, you know what, I'm just not a part of that because I just disagree with it vehemently, and I have no contribution that I've ever made towards that particular thing. Well, you may not have contributed to it, but your voting or lack of voting, your participation or lack of participation, your silence or your speech in assent to a particular issue have all contributed to it being here. We're all a part of this thing. And that is why it's so important when, like a caller from last hour was talking about how we speak, policing up how we parrot out what we're being told in the media that we're supposed to believe. And it's the same thing for these people in France. They voted in this young man married to this older woman who was married when she met him. And he's a home wrecker. And he's also someone who doesn't have enough life experience under his belt to truly understand the plight of every French person. So they're getting what they voted for, and they're enraged. They got on vests and they're just tearing stuff up. And it worked for now, but you best believe he's going to put that tax into effect. He is not deterred. He's just trying to figure out what's wrong with these people. Not, oh my goodness, maybe this tax is a bad idea. It's what's wrong with them. That's his thing. So you got UN climate chief Patricia Espinosa, and this connects up as obviously climate change is the thing that Emmanuel Macron wants to fight. and the people of France want him to stop jacking up their taxes. So they're talking about the same thing, but they're not speaking the same language. Now, the United Nations climate chief has a solution to the urgent climate threat, namely, quote, we require deep transformations of our economies and societies. Now, my personal recommendation for UN climate chief Patricia Espinosa is that she should take herself to one of these third world countries where there's no air conditioning and no central heating and plumbing is not a real thing. And she should go live there. She should do her part to contribute to the improvement of the climate by taking herself off to one of these countries instead of trying to force developed nations back into the Stone Age. She says, this reality, notice how they start speaking in euphemisms, is telling us, this reality is telling us that we need to do more. The impacts, more language, of climate change are increasingly hard to ignore. I don't know about you, but it's, December? And I see big, huge, fluffy snowflakes falling and hitting the ground, and I'm in the Midwest, and that is not odd at all. That is like not. So what is she talking about? And please miss me with this whole climate isn't weather and weather isn't climate. Words aren't words to you. You're just worshiping your God, which is these, redistribution ideology type things. That's your God. That's what you're doing. And if you want to bow down, go ahead. I don't recommend it. I think you're doing wrong, but you do you. But stop trying to make everybody else bow down to your fake, inconsequential, unable to do anything God, climate change. She was joined in this non-speaking speak by former UN Climate Summit presidents saying, they also parroting the same language, we require deep transformations. Failure to act will be catastrophic. Again, language from these movies that we've seen, like 2012. How many have seen the movie 2012? Now, how many of you actually believe that 2012 was a real something that could actually happen to us, because it was a movie that Hollywood made? What is happening in our education system that people go into the movie theater and watch stuff, and then afterwards they come out and they think Wakanda is a real place, or that 2012 is something that could really happen to us because of climate change? Come on. A failure to act now risks pushing us beyond a point of no return with catastrophic consequences for life as we know it, said Amjad Abdullah, chief negotiator for the Alliance of Small Island States of the UN talks. Chief negotiator for the Alliance of Small Island States. You know what would be really funny? I don't know about you guys, but on my little, on my phone, on my iPod, I have a wide variety of music. It's not just one genre. There's you'd be surprised what's on there. And I have classical music, and I wonder if this article would be better if there were classical music playing in the background, and then I read this sentence. A failure to act now risks pushing us beyond a point of no return with catastrophic consequences for life as we know it. He's from the Alliance of Small Island States. He's probably got catastrophic conditions going on there because his country's poverty-stricken, not because of climate. So now they've termed a new term. They've created a new term, a Clexit, climate exit from the UN, building thanks to President Trump. The UN Climate Summit in Katowice may show us if there will be any domino effect following the U.S. withdrawal, said Lawrence Tubiana, CEO of the European Climate Foundation and main architect of the Paris deal. Now, here's the thing. If the UN wasn't funding this European Climate Foundation, then he wouldn't have a platform from which to catapult these nonsensical ideas into our thinking spaces. He would not be able to access us if we weren't funding this. Brazil's strongman president-elect Jair Bolsonaro, for one, has promised to follow the American lead during his campaign. The UN climate chief, Patricia, she's doubled down. She's super excited. She's got a whole lot to say, and she's wearing a very expensive outfit, fancy watch, pearls, hair's freshly cut and coiffed. In a rare intervention, presidents from previous UN climate summits issued a joint statement as the talks got underway, calling on states to take decisive action to tackle these urgent threats. The impacts of climate change are increasingly hard to ignore. So this is, different statements that they're making. Nations must agree to a rule book palatable to all 183 states who have ratified the Paris deal, and it's far from a given because the dust is still settling on U.S. President Donald Trump's exit. Thank God. Honestly, thank God. All right, when we get back, we're going to be talking about U.S. colleges breeding hate. Stay there.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Wildman, president of American Family Association and American Family Radio. Hey, Stephen McDowell has been a personal friend of mine for a couple of decades now. He is one of the best historians I know. He is president of the Providence Foundation, and no one documents early American history, especially the Christian aspect of early American history, better than my friend Stephen McDowell. He is going with us on our spiritual heritage tours, and he'll be talking all along the way and answering questions, and you're going to enjoy spending time with him if you're able to go with us in June or September. Again, we're going to Washington, D.C. and Mount Vernon, and we're also going on a separate trip to Williamsburg, Jamestown, and Yorktown. So if you'd like to go on either one of these or both of them, contact us at spiritualheritagetours.com. That's spiritualheritagetours.com.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
The pay gap between men and women has been the source of economic discussion and political debate for decades. Progressives claim that the gender pay gap is due to sexism and requires government intervention. Others argue that the difference has more to do with the priorities of women in the workforce and choices they make. The Wall Street Journal recently summarized a study done by Harvard economists of the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority. It provided a perfect test case since it is a union shop with uniform hourly wages in which women and men adhere to the same rules and thus enjoy the same benefits. Workers are promoted based on seniority, not performance. Men and women have the same options for scheduling, routes, vacation, and overtime. The rules and regulations made it nearly impossible for bias, sexism, or preferential treatment to affect pay. Even at the Transportation Authority, female bus and train operators earned less than men. In order to explain why, the professors looked at time cards and scheduling and compared it to such factors as sex, age, seniority, and tenure. They found that male bus and train operators worked about 83% more overtime hours than their female colleagues. They were also more than twice as likely to accept an overtime shift on short notice. Since the agency pays time and a half for overtime, this obviously affected earnings. The economists also found that female bus and train operators were much more likely to take routes that wouldn't require them to work nights, weekends, and holidays. That is why they concluded that women, especially single women with children, value both time and the ability to avoid unplanned work much more than men. I think that's the best explanation for the gender pay gap. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Virtually every aspect of the culmination of hysteria that greeted Judge Kavanaugh was perfected over the last decade on a college campus. Above all, the preposterous mantra to believe survivors, regardless of the evidence, regardless of due process. This is the campus rape hysteria that has been transforming the lives of males on campuses, creating an extraordinarily costly bureaucracy, moved into the real world, and it's not going away. It's only going to get worse. And what we are doing is breeding the grounds for, I fear, civil war, because students are being taught to hate the greatest works of Western civilization, and frankly, to hate each other. From the moment a student steps on college campus today as a freshman, or a fresh person, I should probably say, the bureaucracy is determined to drum into that student's head identity politics, which says he's either a victim or an oppressor. Oppressors are obviously, most famously, white males, heterosexual white males. The only way they can get out of their oppressor category is to become an ally of the oppressed. The most preposterous delusion of all of this is students actually believe that they are at risk of their lives from circumambient racism and sexism on a college campus.
So that's Heather McDonald, and she's been on the show before, fantastic expert. She writes about these topics, she researches them, she has a book. I mean, she is incomparable when it comes to just delving into these. There are social impacts that we're experiencing from having nincompoops and fools in charge of so many of the spheres that really are foundational, like our higher educational system, which used to turn out really fine thinkers. In addition to training people in a profession, people would also continue to cultivate the ability to think well and analyze information, and to be exposed to information that was oppositional to their own view and consider it in the frame of the American ethos, the U.S. Constitution, our historical, we've had good in our history, we've had bad, like any other nation. And you'd be able to place America in its proper role in the entire world, and then consider the information that that's coming at you from both sides, from all sides, and consider it well, taking it in, learning from it what you will, but maintaining an American perspective. Now we've moved away from that, and we're really entrenched in, and not all of us, but so many are entrenched in this idea that, well, first of all, ideas are physically painful. Not being exposed to physically painful ideas is more preferable, I should say, is preferable to being exposed to those ideas that we dislike. And just the exposition of ideas that we don't like, even if we don't hear them ourselves. If ideas that we don't like are presented on the campus in a room somewhere on the campus that we may not even be anywhere in close proximity to, just those ideas being presented is a painful assault on our physical person, our ability to speak freely ourselves, et cetera, et cetera. And we're seeing that over and over and over again. And no place has it been better exemplified than UC Berkeley. They're actually paying a conservative organization $70,000 while maintaining their innocence. Now, 70 grand, you might say, but that's some teacher's aide's salary for the year that they're going to dole out to the Young America's Foundation. So after nearly 1 year of litigation in federal court, Young Americans for Freedom announced that they've received a judgment for $70,000. Actually, it's a settlement that they've reached with the University of California, Berkeley over the college's restrictive campus speaker policy. UC Berkeley agreed to pay them 70 grand, rescind their high-profile speaker policy, retract the security fee policy, abolish the so-called heckler's veto, which allowed protesters to shut down events featuring conservative speakers by triggering triggering security concerns, and all viewpoint, they've agreed, all criteria for assessing major events must be applied with a viewpoint neutral manner. The settlement agreement explains the university must identify all events throughout the academic year that fall under its major events policy, the total amount of fees that are paid to UC Berkeley for those events, as well as every reservation from any registered student organization for events that amass more than 100 people or participants. In effect, the university has updated their major events policy. The quote is, all criteria for assessing major events must be applied in a viewpoint neutral manner and without regard to the content of any performance or speaking aspect of the event, according to the settlement. The university also announced the release of a fee schedule for events to help ensure that functions of all types are handled appropriately. Despite all of these court-ordered changes, Berkeley refused to acknowledge that its major events policy was unconstitutional, as alleged by YAF's lawsuit. UC Berkeley says, quote, the court rejected plaintiffs' contentions that the policy gives campus administrators the ability to engage in viewpoint discrimination. Berkeley further noted that the settlement required that the plaintiffs dismiss their litigation. That is an improper thing for them to announce, because a settlement is just that. You agree to leave off the lawsuit that you had initially filed and settle your grievance with them for concessions, money, court costs, fees. You know, you lay all of that on the table and you negotiate. No one is going to give a settlement agreement and then allow the lawsuit to go forward. So their assertion that somehow the dismissal of the lawsuit by the plaintiffs is indicative of their lack of standing or lack of ability to win ignores the fact that UC Berkeley's paying $70,000 and updating their policy. But this is the propaganda machine that is UC Berkeley. Referencing the $70,000 payment from UC Berkeley to the plaintiffs, the settlement states, quote, by agreeing to make this payment, defendants in no way admit the plaintiffs are or would be a prevailing party in the litigation. While we regret the time, effort, and resources that have been expended successfully defending the constitutionality of UC Berkeley's event policy, this settlement means the campus will not need to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in unrecoverable defense costs to prove that UC Berkeley has never discriminated on the basis of viewpoint. That is a big, fat spoonful of lies. And this guy is the spokesman for UC Berkeley, Dan Mogilov. The spokesman further explained that these court proceedings will be the cheapest and easiest path. He emphasized that the settlement does not require the university concede that any of the plaintiffs' claims of previous viewpoint discrimination have any basis in fact. Who cares? What Young America's Foundation was trying to do was to get the policy updated so that it was no longer discriminatory towards conservatives. Admitting that it was discriminatory is not required since the behavior that they were engaging in was preventing conservative speakers from speaking on campus. Now they've set themselves up. If they truly believe Dan Mogilov's statements that they never discriminated, then why do they need to update their policy? Now that the policy's been updated, if they don't abide by their own policy, YAF can simply sue them again. And they would prevail because they have to abide by their own policies. It's a win for Young America's Foundation. It's a win, and I'm so glad they were able to pull it off. If there's one thing we know to be the truth that we have to agree on, it's that the people who most often say conservatives are fascists are the ones engaging in fascist behavior themselves. It's these college campus flunkies, these people who are, they're doing gender studies and, black studies and women's studies, and they're so sensitive, they can't even hear an opposing viewpoint. And it's not about the delivery of the viewpoint. It's that they can't even allow someone who disagrees with them to speak anywhere near where they would be, like possibly they might walk there. And this is the way we're raising kids nowadays. If you're someone who's got kids who are going to school or wherever, and that's what they're ending up with, that's their viewpoint, that's how they're behaving, we got problems. And I know at one point it was really popular to say, oh, this is the, everybody gets a trophy generation. And that was done because kids were keeping score and things were getting really competitive, and people insist on people playing sports. Kids have to start playing sports when they're like 3 years old. Now, full disclosure, we did the same thing. Our kids were in those little tiny leagues, soccer and this and that. And we did it. All of our neighbors did it. We were just like right in there in the herd playing in the little local municipality sport league. And it was fun for the kids. But what was funny to me was, the first time we ever went to the meeting, you go and you're two parents and you got one kid who's going to play who's like 4 or 5. And then you have 2 other kids. Our 2 little kids, one was still in the front pack carrier, and our little guy, he was walking, but he was really small. And so we get there and he's like, I want to play. So he grabs the soccer ball, starts kicking it all over the place. And our daughter was sitting there and she's like, I want to hear what the rules are. And so he says, well, with these little games, these games for the tiniest kids, we don't actually keep score. And Maya, like her eyes got huge. She said, no scoring. She's like not even 5. She immediately latched onto the fact that she'd be playing, but no one would be keeping track. She said, Mommy, will you keep track? And I said, yeah, sure. So what I came to find out after they began to play, when the season started, is that if you sit anywhere near the bench where the kids who aren't on the field are sitting, waiting on their turn to, get put in, You can hear them. They're like, oh, now it's 3-4. The kids on the bench, they're keeping score. So they don't care if you're keeping score up on the big board. They're saying in their own little minds, because otherwise, why are they playing, right? So everything that we're doing to try to take competition out of things, to try to suppress the human desire to compete and to do well and to rank in order who is better, who, people don't want to compete. People don't want to see other people be successful because they think it bodes badly on themselves. Actually, it doesn't. And one of the things that we taught our kids during this episode, where not only was she playing, but then our son started playing, and they're 15 months apart. So they were like on literally one team was only slightly bigger than the other team as far as height and stature. And we'd go to the games, and sometimes they'd be back to back because he was on a boys team and she was on a girls team. And they could play on really the same level because they were only a year apart. And one thing we really stressed to them was you can definitely, compete with the other team. But on your own team, instead of saying, well, he's faster than I am, or compete with yourself. And we tried to drill that into them, because what ends up happening when people are competing with other people is, first of all, you're not equipped the same as another person. No one is. And obviously there's going to be some competition because people in the same industry are going to be comparing their progress with other people in the same industry. But the competition for us as Christians is with ourselves. And when I say that, it's bettering ourselves and getting further along with whatever God has given us to do. And the minute we start saying, well, I've got to be competing with him, I've got to be competing with her, I've got to be, that I can't let that person do more than I'm doing. How are you going to let anybody do anything? How are you going to fix your mouth, face, hands, whatever you got going on, to undo or redo or have some impact on whatever that person is praying to God for and working out on their own? That's why it's so important for us to compete with ourselves. And if you need to compete with someone, and competing with yourself is simply saying, look, here's where I was last year. This year I'm here. And you pray over your goals and you say, Lord, what do you want me to be doing? And then work towards that, instead of saying, well, that person's doing this, well, that person's doing that. Now, that doesn't mean that rules don't matter or that we don't have to listen to those who are placed in authority over us. But the competition for the pure sake of competition, that's not the way we're supposed to be doing it. And what's funny to me is that our human need to assess our progress in areas, which includes keeping score, that starts so early on that little 3- and 4-year-olds are on the bench using their fingers to count off. One little boy would keep one hand was for the opposing team, the other hand was for his own team. And he would keep score using his fingers. And remember, these are little tiny kids playing soccer, so it's not like they're ever getting to 8 or 9 points. It's like really low scoring points. And he would keep scoring his little fingers. And sometimes if the adults lost track, we would just glance down and look, and there he'd be with his little fingers up, and we'd be like, okay, we got 4. No, she must not have scored because he's still at 4. And when they got bigger and they started keeping score, it was easier, obviously. But we're not doing these kids anything good by trying to ignore the human desire to keep track of what's going on. And if what we're turning out is kids who are so soft and so weak that they can't hear the opposing view, they can't even have the opposing view be present in their college or university, then what kind of parenting is really going on? And I know for conservatives, that's not the way we raise our kids. But our kids are in schools with these other little soft mamby-pamby types. And I think it's pretty sad. It is honestly just it's like, these are grown-ups. These are people with cars. These are people who are driving and working and living every day. And also their university is now paying out $70,000 to YAF, which in my opinion, they probably deserved more than that. YAF probably deserved a couple $100,000. And the payment, it doesn't say whether or not the payment includes their court costs. The article doesn't. It's over at Campus Reform. Fascinating piece by Mason Mackay about this development. Young America's Foundation, they won. They beat the stuffing out of UC Berkeley, because if they hadn't, UC Berkeley wouldn't be paying them $70,000. I don't care what their spokes guy says. All right, so We will be back with Michael Gardner, Senior Director of Communications for Medi-Share, right after these messages. Keep it here.
What does it take to live an uncommon life? Here's former Super Bowl winning coach Tony Dungy with today's uncommon moment.
I once heard a company executive say, "Of course I know how to lead. I've been in charge of one thing or another for more than 30 years." Of course, that's how the world views leadership. It's all about the power or authority we wield over other people. One's position or status is certainly part of the leadership equation, but only part. Many of the most effective leaders I've seen do not have positional authority over the people they lead. What I'm talking about are mentor leaders, people who recognize the value of helping others flourish. It's about the lives you've impacted and improved. It's about thinking of others ahead of yourself.
Tony Dungy, author of the popular Uncommon book series. Discover more at CoachDungy.com. That's CoachDungy.com.
Hi, this is Steve Tiber with 8 Days of Hope. We've been all over the country helping disaster victims who lose everything.
It's truly a blessing. I really don't have the words to express.
And yet they see a glimmer of hope when a volunteer shows up.
Building the home, that's the second reason we're here. The number one reason is to share the gospel and give them hope.
It's everything that's right in America. I mean, it really represents the best that we have to offer.
That's one of the main reasons for doing it, is being able to be the hands and feet of Jesus and coming out and working with so many wonderful volunteers.
I just feel like it's important in this day and age to teach a child how to serve.
Please go to our website, 8daysofhope.com, and click on Get Involved. Submit your email address, and the next time we go anywhere with a disaster, we'll invite you to come along as well.
I love coming in the job room because you can see these pieces of paper. They aren't just a piece of paper. Right. It's a family that's hurting, and it's a gospel opportunity.
You know, I just thank God, for this moment. I mean, I'll be back in my home, and I know it's going to be awesome.
Come love others with 8 Days of Hope.
Media Minute with Howard Kurtz.
The New York Times says Sheryl Sandberg, Facebook's #2, was not telling the truth when she denied knowing anything about the social network's attacks on Democratic contributor George Soros. In fact, says the Times, Sandberg asked for the information about Soros in an email to another executive after Soros had publicly criticized Facebook as well as Google. She has a great media image. She's the author of Lean In, but she was not being straight about her role. Meanwhile, the Daily Caller reports that engineers at Google, some of them, wanted to bury results from conservative sites. Here's an email. Too much stuff, this person says, from opinion blogs, Breitbart, Daily Caller, elevated next to legitimate news organizations. That can and should be fixed. But another engineer, a Hillary supporter, says thinking that Breitbart and Drudge, etc. are not legitimate news sources is contrary to the beliefs of a major portion of our user base. Good for him. Once you tamper with search results, credibility goes out the window. With your Media Minute, Howie Kurtz, Fox News.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Welcome back to the program. Thanks for being here today. It is a pleasure to be with you. And this is the last segment of the second hour of Stacy on the Right here on Urban Family Talk. You can find the podcast at urbanfamilytalk.com and afr.net. Right now, it's my pleasure to welcome Michael Gardner, Senior Director of Communications for Medi-Share. Michael, thank you for being here today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, so let's talk about Medi-Share. And this is something that I think enough Americans don't know about. I'm so excited to hear that Medi-Share now has over 400,000 participants. And that, to me, represents a strong, it's like a beachhead, a place from which to launch further battles, to get more people to be aware. And so I want to talk a little bit about what it is. Can you tell the listeners just what is Medi-Share?
Absolutely. So Medi-Share is a healthcare sharing ministry. We've now been around for 25 years. This is our 25th anniversary, and we're really excited about that. And it really is a community of people who voluntarily come together every month to share one another's medical burdens. So, it's modeled, it's a faith-based community. We model it based on the description we see of the early church in the book of Acts, where people came together and sold their possessions and their belongings, and they shared with one another, and their needs were met. And that's really the motivation behind the program. So this idea of sharing is 2,000 years old, and we're really just happy to be able to bring that into the community today, so people's medical burdens are being lifted by one another.
Okay, so insurance companies don't use terms such as burden and share, as you just described there when you were telling us what Medi-Share is. But Medi-Share, that's a part of who you are as a cost-sharing organization. So what makes Medi-Share a ministry and not a traditional company providing insurance?
Absolutely. You're right. And that's one of the things that we try to make very clear to people is that Medi-Share is not a health insurance company. I think there's this misconception that we're an affordable Christian health insurance offering, and that's really not the case. It's a much different thing. It feels different. And I think, first of all, one of the things that's really different is the community aspect and the community of prayer that comes together. So prayer is a really important aspect for our members. They pray for one another when they share in medical needs or have a medical burden. And our ministry prays for our members when they call in. People call in, asking about a bill. Our folks on the phones will pray with them, lift things up. There are boards throughout the ministry with the names of members who need specific prayers. And so that's really the heart of the organization is to come alongside one another and bear those burdens and do it in the community of prayer. So that's quite different. I think one of the other things that makes it different, too, is that this is really member-to-member direct sharing from one member to another. And in some cases, it can be from hundreds of members to another for a really sizable burden. And, our members have had those types of things over the year, cancer treatment, really serious accidents, injuries, organ transplants. Our members have shared in all of those kinds of things and everyday burdens throughout the years.
So one thing that I think will pop into someone's mind if they hear that is, what if I submit my bill and nobody wants to share it? Does that happen? Is that possible?
It is voluntary sharing. To my knowledge, that's not happened. The idea is we automate this for members and bring people together in community. So I'll know, for example, every month I'll get a notification of all the different people that I'm sharing with. And in some cases, I'll find out what that specific need was. I'll find out, what health condition that person is struggling with. In other cases, members don't want to share that information as well. But we kind of automate that process and really try to build this community where we connect a person that has a medical bill with a group of other people who can share in that bill. And so that's worked really well for our members over the years. We can talk about the specifics of how that works, too, if you'd like.
Well, okay, so yes, I do want to hear the specifics, because I think one of the things that I've noticed, especially in talking about Medi-Share, is people assume that there has to be a downside to it. There has to be a way where there's three people who aren't getting shared anything, or they're only having to use their own funds that they put in because no one wants to share. And I was like, I don't think that's possible. But that's why I asked that question. And so how specifically does it work? Like what's the quick rundown of the process?
Absolutely. So there are really, let's talk first Medi-Share by the numbers. There are two numbers you really need to understand to have the full picture on how this works. So the first is called your monthly share amount, and that's a monthly amount that, as a member, you deposit into a sharing account every month. And it's important to understand that that amount is not used for your own medical expenses. It's actually shared with other members in need. So, my family, we're all Medi-Share members, my wife, myself, and our two kids. Each month, our monthly share is $315. We deposit that into our share account, and we never use that for our own expenses. We share that with other people. Because at the same time, if we have medical bills or medical needs, we'll go to the doctor or go to the pharmacy, and get those medical needs met, and we'll pay all of our bills up to a certain limit, and we call that limit your annual household portion. And so it's the amount of your own medical bills that you commit to paying before you ask the other members to come alongside you and lift your burden.
Like your deductible.
That annual household. It's similar to that. Everyone's eligible medical bills count towards it in the family, so it's for everyone in the house, everyone in your member household. And it's customizable, so we really do have 7 different options. That amount could be as low as $1,500 a year. It could be as high as $10,500 a year, and it really allows people to tailor this to their own family situation. If you've been working for a number of years and you have some savings set aside that you could use for a medical situation if that arose, you could choose a higher annual household portion. But for folks just starting out, they may not feel comfortable doing that and may choose a lower one. So that's the thing that you need to understand is you'll pay every penny of your own medical bills up to that, till you get to that annual household portion amount, and that's when the sharing happens.
Okay. So then after you've selected your amount and you're paying in and your bills are being shared, that's pretty much it. When you go to the doctor, they're billing you as a person who doesn't have insurance, or does this put you in the insured rates column where you're paying less for each visit and all of that?
Technically you're not insured because you don't have health insurance, since Medishare isn't health insurance. But what we do offer our members is access to a nationwide network of providers. So there are negotiated rates with those providers for discounting as well. So in effect, when you seek medical care, you find a provider, ideally choose one from the network because it helps control your out-of-pocket costs. You go see that provider, you get the care you need, your provider sends the bills to Medishare, and we do the rest. So that's really where Medishare comes in. It's important to understand that Medishare doesn't pay bills. We don't pay medical bills, for members. Members share bills directly with one another. So when a bill comes to us, we'll look at it and say, okay, were applicable discounts applied to this bill? If they were, then we say, okay, was it eligible for sharing? So bills fall into a couple different categories. Either they're eligible for sharing, they're not eligible for sharing, or they're eligible for sharing but with some limitations. And so we'll look at that bill, and if it's eligible for sharing and you've met your annual household portion, it then gets shared by the other members at 100%. That's important to understand. We don't do 70-30, 80-20, splits and those sorts of things.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So the midterms just happened, and I was wondering if you could share with us what drove voters to place health care as a defining issue in exit polling in the midterm elections.
Sure. I mean, if you just look at your family's monthly budget, healthcare is a sizable percentage of that for everyone. So people are definitely looking for healthcare solutions. They're getting creative with those solutions. I remember, in my working life, there have been times when I had health insurance through an employer, and that worked really well for my family. But I think for people, about half of our members are self-employed, and so they may not have that option available to them. So Medishare is certainly, I think, attractive to them. But people are really becoming much more savvy healthcare consumers, and we see people kind of joining together. A family may have health insurance for one person and Medishare for others. They may have other products as well that they use to put together for the full package that they need to meet their family's healthcare needs. And I think people are just becoming much more savvy consumers of healthcare.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think people are just looking for, because in the technology age that we're living in, you would think that we'd have better control over something like healthcare, something that this is new. We didn't just discover healthcare, but we're still battling over it and having really not a lot of success with managing it. But Medishare seems to be kind of the departure from that norm, where you don't have haggling over all of that stuff. It's a very simple, you've laid out what sounds like a simple, well-working plan that can be executed. You just join in, you join the other 400,000 plus, you start contributing, your bills get shared after you meet your annual portion, and the added bonus is that people are praying for you and kind of participating in that healing process. So you talked about the 25th
Absolutely.
Anniversary. How, Michael, and we're speaking with Michael Gardner. If you're just tuning into the show, we're speaking with Michael Gardner. He's the Senior Director of Communications for Medishare. Michael, how did Medishare get started to begin with?
It's actually one of those success stories where something was started in someone's garage. That's actually how it happened. Our founder started it in his garage here in Melbourne, Florida, where we're still headquartered today. And the program has grown over time. It was started with this vision of allowing people to come together and share in one another's healthcare burdens. And over time, that solution has certainly fit for a lot of different people for a lot of different reasons. And so it's just great to be here, looking forward to the next 25 years and seeing where God is going to take this and what kind of solutions we can solve with sharing. The whole idea behind this program, really, sharing is important. And members, I think, often call to learn about Medishare because they hear about how affordable it is. Our average family right now pays right around $400 a month is that monthly share amount. And so people hear that number and they call. And I think that's really important, because one of the things that we really are allowed to do is for people to keep more of their money to put it to work. And, that's the real motivation behind what we do, that if we can give people prayer support and we can help people keep their resources and use them effectively, they can respond to whatever call God has on their life. So that they're now able to go buy books for their a Bible study, so people can participate who otherwise couldn't, or they're adopting children or homeschooling their children or starting ministries and small business of their own. And that's really, what drives us is if we can help people free up some of their resources to go fulfill that calling, they're going to make a difference in their family and in their community and in their churches. And that for us is a really worthwhile thing to support.
Wow. So I just while you were speaking, Michael, I was thinking of some other things that you're freed up to do. Like if you don't have to get a job based on your employer providing health insurance for you, then that opens up the realm of possibility for you starting your own business or working for yourself. And so do you have in amongst the 400,000 users young people just starting out who've graduated from college, but they want to hang their own shingle and they're starting out with MediShare because that enables them to be able to work for themselves?
We do. I mean, it really runs the gamut. But, half of our members are self-employed. So some of them work in financial services, some of them work in consulting, some of them work in technology. The real common denominator is that this is a community of faith and that people are really putting their faith into practice. And this, the MediShare program is allowing them to do that in an even more effective way. So that's really what we aspire to is to help people through that, through that process.
So what's driving the growing number of urban Christians to choose MediShare?
Well, I think the real question is what's causing people in general to look at alternatives like this, and a lot of it really does have to do with cost. People are trying to figure out a way to stretch their dollars, to do more in our case, in our membership's case, to do more with those dollars because they do feel called to do something with it. And so I think cost is certainly driving a lot of this, and that's a lot of times I think why people inquire about it. But hearing the stories from people about their needs being met and about what they're doing with the savings is really the end result of that, I think. You mentioned technology, and one of the things that really kind of separates MediShare from a lot of other programs, I think, is the way that we use technology, because we try to apply it to keep more money in people's pocket. And one of the things that we implemented within the last 2 years, I guess now, is a telemedicine program. So our members all get no-cost access to a telemedicine program where they can actually see a board-certified physician who's board-certified in their state 24/7 every day of the year. And, from clicking a button to making an appointment to seeing the doctor to talking to the doctor on the phone to getting a text message from my local pharmacy that my prescription is ready, maybe a half an hour proposition. And so it's one of those programs where we said, well, because you're going to pay every penny of your own health care, so you hit that AHP, that means for little things like when my kids get, strep throat or a pink eye or somebody has the flu, we're going to pay out of pocket for that. But with our telemedicine program, people can now see a provider at no cost for those everyday kinds of things. It's just one of the things that we try to add on to the program, to help people reduce that out of pocket and stretch those resources even further.
All right. So we have about 60 seconds left. Tell us the first step if someone's interested and they want to join in this kind of revolution that you've been operating for 25 years now. What do they do?
Absolutely. The best place to go for information is our website, which is MediShare, MEDI share.com. There's great information there. You can see pricing information. You can see testimonials from members who have had really substantial needs shared. There's information about how the program works. And most importantly, there's a phone number there that people can call to speak with someone here at MediShare to get answers to their questions. We talked about the fact that this really is a different animal. It's different from what people are used to. And at this time of the year, people are making really important decisions about what they're going to do for health care in the upcoming year. And we want to make sure they make an informed decision. So I would always encourage people to check out that information, but call and have a conversation.
MediShare.com. Thank you so much, Michael, for joining the show. Good evening from the Heartland, citizens. Back with you tomorrow. StacyOnTheRight.com.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast do not necessarily reflect those of Urban Family Talk, Urban Family Communications, or American Family Association.
Urban Family